I'm Mike Mistel. I'm the Social Studies Department Chair at Lakeland Union High School in Minocqua, Wisconsin. Today I have a guest here. This is my guest, Carol Amour. Carol and I have known each other for quite a long time in various capacities, but today Carol is representing the First Nations Traveling Resource Center. Our topic today is talking about materials by and about Native American people that would be appropriate for classroom instruction. Carol, as a classroom teacher, I've always wondered, how do I select materials that are appropriate for my classroom when I teach about Native American culture and people?
Mike, that's a really good question. And you dropped in a few cents, you're going to get a lot of words back.
Okay.
You know, back when we first met, you said we've known each other for a long time, and we have.
Yeah, since the early 90s.
Yeah, so back when we first met, it was kind of tough to find good material for classroom use. So we sometimes use things that maybe weren't the greatest just because they were on topic.
Mm-hmm.
But we don't have to do that anymore. There are more and more and more really good books coming out by and about Native people, so that we really can, work towards that spirit of Act 31.
Yeah.
And we really can, help kids have perspective, in the classroom. And this is for preschool all the way through high school.
Yeah.
You can find this. And so actually you mentioned our First Nations Traveling Resource Center.
Mm-hmm.
That's how we got started, with all of this, is back when we were having, which is still going on, which is great, through DPI, the American Indian Studies Institute in the summer. Really invite anyone who's listening to this to find out more about that institute and to take that opportunity to participate in that institute. But during that time, we were often challenged to start a project that would continue learning about Act 31 and about the tribes of Wisconsin throughout the school year. So there were a number of us who started a project to help people be aware of what are the good books. Mm-hmm. And where you can find the good books, and what are things you should really look at to help you know if the material is accurate material, if it's unbiased material. So we started this First Nations Traveling Resource Center, and I'd just like to acknowledge the people who were the first people in that center, and that was J.P. Leary.
Okay.
Who of course worked for DPI for a number of years and is now at UW Green Bay. And that was Dr. Lisa Poupart, who is also at UW Green Bay. And that was the late Matt Stewart, who was from the Fond du Lac Nation of Ojibwe, and Marge Green from here in Lac du Flambeau.
Okay. And
we were, first of all, sponsored by the Great Lakes Intertribal Council for a number of years, and then our sponsorship kind of moved to the Wisconsin Indian Education Association. So that's, they are still our supporters, and we are available to travel all over the state, to any school, to any college, to any parent group, to do workshops on how you pick good books and on how you can use them in the classroom. And also we have a large collection of books, and so we're continuing to add to that. And one of the big things, I guess I should start with, because we learned so much from Dorothy Davids and Ruth Godinas,
yes. Mm-hmm.
Who have walked on, but they really got us going on all of this. And one thing that they always looked for when you're looking for books is, first of all, to look for books that are written by Native people. Very important.
Okay. Yeah.
And then secondly, if they're not written by a Native person, that they're published by a Native press. And then thirdly, if it's in either of those, that it's clear that the people have worked with people from the tribes, and not just made one call, or not just read something by those people, but that they actually have had advice and they've had input, and that it's, in a sense, been approved by people from the tribes.
Okay.
So those are real good guidelines to
Yep.
begin with. I should also mention a group called Oyate, O-Y-A-T-E. And that group has been in existence for quite a number of years. They do a lot of reviews of literature. You can look up a book on their website, and they'll kind of give you their opinion about, whether it's biased or not biased, or whether it's something that you should be using in the classroom. There also is American Indians in Children's Literature, which is an ongoing blog by Debbie Reese. And that also has very good information about what literature is accurate, what literature is culturally responsive and relevant, and what is problematic.
Okay.
Because at this point, really, there is so much out there, it's good to have someone to go to, you know,
Yes.
that you know you can go to. But if you're at a conference, you're at a bookstore, and you're looking for material, and you have money in hand, you want to get some material to use with your students, here's some things to kind of keep in mind that we always try to do through First Nations Traveling Resource Center. And the first one is, and I should back up just a step, another really good thing with that is you can use that in the classroom with your students. You know, bring in a lot of books. Bring in books that aren't so hot and books that are really good. And then talk about these guidelines, and the students may come up with some other very good guidelines, and then have them, you know, pick out what books they would share with other people and what books they would say have problems of one kind or another.
Sure.
So one thing to look for, and this you're going to do this in your classroom, and it's great to get students involved, I think. One thing is to look to see if the illustrations are caricatures. It still comes out, it still happens. Mascots are a good example of that.
Okay.
Sometimes the illustrations in books, you know, really fit into that category. It's very disrespectful, it minimizes, and that's not something that we want to be doing. I've just been talking. Anything you'd like to insert there, Mike?
Well, just as an overview, Carol will also be doing 3 more lessons, and those will be targeting the 3 different levels of education. So if you want to follow, it's almost like a series that Carol will be doing a number of materials for elementary school, another one for middle school, and then one that's appropriate for high school. So you can follow those. If you like this one, check in those other 3.
Okay. So we know we're going to spot caricatures, and if that's just not going to work. Another thing to be looking for, and you'll find this especially in books that were published, you know, before 2000, but it still shows up from time to time. Books that purport to be about a certain tribe, and then they use the word all. So rather than some or even many would be better than all, but in the text it'll talk about, you know, all Lakota did this,
Okay.
you know, or all Menominee did this. You know, there may be generalizations from each tribe, but it's never all, you know, so that's really a flag right there.
Okay.
Another one is if the book gives either the impression that Native people were fierce, you know, again, you don't see it as much anymore, but that still will pop up every once in a while.
Yes.
Before 2000, a lot of that kind of thing, where in the past Native people were fierce people. Or that, you know, all Native people, it's overly romanticized, so it talks really about like being a tree hugger. And, you know, definitely with so many tribes, we talk about the importance of connections to Mother Earth and then that relationship to the earth and to nature and so forth. But when it goes beyond that into the, you know, kind of romanticized tree hugging thing, that's not realistic, you know, either. So look for that. Another thing to look for, you know, that will kind of jump out at you quickly, and you can say, okay, we won't spend our money on this one. We'll invest our money over here. Is books or films, you know, where non-natives, particularly white people, come in and save the day. You know, in a sense, Avatar, the film, is an example of that. I think we're at a point where we're far beyond having other people being those saviors. So that's a thing you might want to look for too. Probably one of the most dangerous negatives to look for, or problems to look for, and not to reinforce, is that notion that the tribes are extinct. because the tribes are absolutely not extinct. There are over 500 tribes throughout the United States, today. And certainly, the number of Native people in this country, it has been reduced because of all kinds of policies that have been implemented, and because of land grabs from the get-go and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But despite all of those things, despite the removal, despite all of those policies, the people have survived, and the tribes are vibrant, and the tribes are all around us. The tribes are here.
Yeah.
And so you definitely wouldn't want to find a book, that talks about the tribes as if they're in the past, because they're not.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing that happens, and this still happens, unfortunately, is that the customs or the culture of one tribe will be confused with the customs and the culture of another tribe.
Okay.
Or the tribes will all be kind of put together. For example, you might be talking about tribes in Wisconsin, and in that book it would show, for example, teepees. And it's not congruent, that doesn't match, it doesn't fit. Teepees were more a thing of the plains. That's not that there was never ever a teepee here, that doesn't, not that, but
Yes.
wouldn't be the typical traditional housing of the tribes here.
Mm-hmm.
So there are all kinds of things that are problematic about that, the mixing or confusing culture and tradition and customs, but it's really just plain inaccurate, it's wrong, so it's something you'd want to look for.
Okay.
And then another thing would be the perspective, to really look for the perspective. And that goes back to the first things that we talked about, is it by a Native person? Is it published by a Native publisher? You really have to look at the perspective. And if the perspective is a non-Native perspective, and they haven't checked it, with anyone, if they haven't checked their research, if they haven't checked what they're saying with anyone, there can very easily be errors.
Mm-hmm.
And so you really want to look for these other signs of problems if there's no evidence of the book being by a Native person or reviewed by a Native person.
Okay.
And then one last thing that we use when we're, and there are many other things, but one last thing that we use when we choose books is that sometimes, and again, particularly non-Native authors, this would be true of, sometimes an author will base all of their research on books, and oftentimes on books by other non-Natives. So they're just perpetuating stereotypes or incorrect information or bias. So you really want to look for, did that person go to the place they're talking about? Did that person talk with people from the place they're talking about? It's more likely to be accurate than if they only base their research on books. So those are some of the guidelines that we use when we pick books. And I, as I say, at this point in time, there are so many good books out there that, why would you want to have books that had any of those problems? So now that we're kind of at the end of that discussion, before we close, would it be okay if I read a little bit from one of my favorite books that represents all those things?
I would love that.
Okay. So this is a book that has nothing that's not good.
Okay.
This is a book that you should have in your collection. Mm-hmm. What's the most beautiful thing you know about horses? To begin with, it's by a Native author, Richard Van Camp, and the illustrations are by a wonderful Native illustrator by the name of George Littlechild.
Okay.
And what I like to do with this book often is have older students, high school, middle school, work with it and then share it with the young ones. Mm-hmm. With one-on-one reading kind of thing. It's great for that. But it represents really the best in Native literature at this point in time, in that It tells you something about the tribes that it's talking about. You know, that's good, so it doesn't confuse tribes. It's super writing, and it's a message really for all of us, because it celebrates, you know, the gifts that we've been given. It is a real positive message. So I'm just going to read you the last couple pages.
Okay.
All right?
Sure.
And I'm going to try not to tear up, because I almost always tear up when I read this book. It's so beautiful. So they've been talking through this whole book about, they've been asking different people, getting opinions, not thinking they know everything, you know, getting different opinions about horses. What's the most beautiful thing you can find out? And this is how it ends. Now that we've found out all these beautiful things about horses, what could we find out about all the animals of the earth if we called everybody in the whole world? Here are some of the secrets I learned the last time it was this cold. I learned that an eagle has 3 shadows. I learned that frogs are the keepers of rain. I learned that there's an animal on this earth who knows your secret name. Well, partners, puppies need lots of sleep, and so do I. But before I go for my nap, let me ask you, what's the most beautiful thing you know about horses? And what's the most beautiful thing you know about you? Isn't that just lovely?
That's a great story.
So it's really been delightful chatting with you this afternoon. And I hope we can get together again soon.
Okay. Well, Carol, that was wonderful advice for us in looking for classroom materials, some things to look for in quality materials and things to stay away from. And really our goal in this segment is for classroom teachers to feel comfortable to address the topics in your classroom and not to avoid it because you're not quite sure that you might make a mistake. So those are really wonderful guidelines. Carol also will be sharing knowledge and materials in elementary school level, the middle school level, and for high school level. So thank you very much. Thanks, Carol.